Are folks hiring out there? If not, why not? If so, what are you seeing in your state climate that is causing that to make you optimistic? I'm going to have to call on some people if I don't hear from you. David?
You know, I'm first honored to be here and have the opportunity to speak with you know, such distinguished people that have so much to do with the environment in which our businesses operate. On a state level, you know, you don't always choose the state where your business is. I mean, I know everybody has their PR and marketing department out saying, let's locate in Wisconsin, and I'd like to know who bought those bumper stickers, because, you know, the things that we do typically is we manufacture promotional products, the tchotchkes that Joel discussed with a smile. Those obviously are my livelihood, and the livelihood for a few hundred people back in Iowa. The thing that, you know, is remarkable is I actually grew up in that state of Illinois, and, you know, I ended up in Iowa through chance, and as I got into Iowa, I decided I wanted to be in business there, and it was a very favorable environment because people would give you a chance. I didn't have to have $100 million, and I didn't have to have you know, a state development person call me up and say, how about coming to Iowa? I was already there, and I had $200, and I had a little dream, and, you know, somehow I talked somebody into giving me a chance, and it grew and it grew. And now 28 years later, you know, we're a sizable company in our industry, which is an industry that's 25% smaller than it was 3 years ago because of Farmageddon. They don't give things out anymore. Because of the economy where you have to tell your employees you don't have a raise, maybe you don't have a job. Or more importantly, maybe you don't have an opportunity here because we somehow had to phase out that entire area. When you look at Iowa, you know, the climate it's probably the same as in every state, but the thing that, you know, we never really talked about when we started was health costs, insurance costs. We never talked about regulatory control. We never talked about the burdens of tax. We were happy to make a living. In fact, I was profitable from day one because I didn't take a paycheck. I showed it to my uncle who was vice president of Walgreens. He looked at me and said, you know, it's not a realistic P&L. You're not taking any income. I said, well, you know, I'm trying to build the business. I was putting it back then. And, you know, when you work your first year with an MBA on the wall and you make $18,000 a year and risk everything that you don't even have, you know, it's a different story than looking now and saying, well, what are we going to do for these small businesses? As a small business, I think I'm speaking when I say that, you know, I've heard DIRT as an acronym today. I'd like to propose something like the word HURT, which is basically healthcare reform, incentives, regulatory control of sorts, and certainly taxes. All of those things impact a small business. Small business, unfortunately, doesn't have the right to say much. I may probably already said more than most have said in the last 20 years. But I think it's important to sit down and actually have a conversation about how do you foster, you know, the industrial revolution on a secondary tier. I agree with that. We're in manufacturing. I went into it not through choice, but I couldn't get things done. So I started buying things around me that were going out of business. And we reinvested in those things, and those things have grown. We bought a plastics plant not even 6 months ago, and it was out of business. Why was it out of business? Well, certainly regulatory parts, but mostly no money, a lack of direction, you know, spending a lot of time running from place to place trying to save themselves from the bank. And, you know, I can honestly say the state of Iowa was very helpful in getting that under control. We saved, you know, 20 families' jobs and got it started on a rebirth. I think that rebirth is very important. I began my business as an importer. 30 years ago, I went to China as a young man. I was 20-something. I wanted to climb the Great Wall. I came back and I said, you know, that country has something that we don't have. They have drive. They have spirit. They have a patriotism that's really unequaled. I mean, when they got the Olympics, they were cavelling. And, it's, you know, that terminology means they were feeling such joy inside to have that Olympics. They would celebrate. They always celebrate the United States when we're there. Why? Because we're their teachers. We teach them how to make money. There's nothing more than respectful, you know, nature there. When they meet somebody that's making a living and is successful in business, to them that's like meeting the president, because they're going to take that little nugget and they're going to invest it and they're going to build something. Every time I go back, which is twice a year, every single April and every October, I marvel. I mean, first it was no pudong. I'd go to Shanghai, there was nothing but an old river and guys eating red beans and rice on a stick, frozen. I said, that's not ice cream to me. They said, well, that's our ice cream. I go, well, I can't eat that. Now I look over there and you see, Jinmao Tower, the Tower of Gold sitting there on the other side. It looks nicer than New York. I love New York, but it looks nicer. Everything's new. Everything's bigger and better. The high-speed rail, I was on the maglev train when it first opened up. We only went 15 miles maybe, but I went 300 miles an hour. I was amazed. I hear about high-speed rail from the Obama administration. I'm concerned because we're trying to build a rail through Iowa to Chicago. Well, I drive that all the time. I grew up there. It only takes about 5 hours, and there's no stoplights. I mean, you don't need hundreds of millions of dollars to build that train. What you need is a few grants and loans to save a lot of industry in this country that's really just hanging on. And, I'm blessed in that we've always been profitable. We still are, and we've had 3 years of bad weather. And we haven't let anybody go, but we haven't given raises. We don't match 401ks anymore. We look at health care and look at the expense, $500 for a family, and you freak out. The guy would like to have that as income. So to be short, I guess there's a lot of issues that could be addressed, and in this particular kind of setting, I think the big business is important, but there are 27 million small businesses in America. We got to deduct 21 million. Those are one-person companies. Some will grow, but most won't. They'll be trading places. The other 6 million, are the ones that are growing, and they're building jobs. Most of them are 5 to 10 years of age already, and they're now entering their maturation stage.
Mark, I can follow up?
Yeah, Governor, sure.
On that, because your point is exactly right. I know the chamber is primarily made up of larger companies, but I think in most states we're about 71% of all our new jobs are small businesses. So it's the entrepreneurs really driving the job creation. When you look back 28 years ago, and maybe open up to others too, the things that hurt or were impediments to you really getting started and up and running those first 3, 4, 5 years, what can government do differently or better at the state level? What were your problems in getting started, and what can we learn from your experience? That would be helpful.
Well, I think my biggest, just getting started was a big hurdle. Just saying, I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I'm going to do my own gig. And you woke up and I said, I'm going to open a business, and I opened it up inside of an optical shop. It was 200 square feet. The guy gave me rent for $200 a month. And I went out and I started banging on doors. I got to know everybody in the city of Des Moines. I met them personally, begging for $1 here or there to buy something. In those days, we were selling, market research and advertising, but there was no money in that. And after going to China, I said, we got to make something. So we started making stuff in China. But in the beginning, there was no regulatory problems. The government didn't ask me to inspect every shipment, didn't ask me for all these certificates of safety and material use, and it was a lot simpler. I mean, the biggest problem I had was getting $1 from a bank. They wanted me to buy a boat or something, and then they'd give me a loan. But when I said I just need $5,000, I'm going to carpet down, I got this little office, I had to call my father, and he wanted it paid back within 3 weeks.
Well, let's talk about others' experience on trade now. And I'm sorry, Governor.
My experience, I started out my first business, I was, I think, 21. I bought a donut shop for $7,500. And I grew up with, I lived in public housing starting school. It is so hard, just the regulation in this country, and local level, state level, federal level, just to do anything to get started. And then you know that you're not doing it all right. You can't, there's no way. Even in our state where we're reducing regulation, we have 11,000 regulations. How can you, we regulate hair weavers. Not an issue for me. But, if you look at what we do, we make it so difficult for anybody to grow a business. And we all know the growth is in these small businesses. So we've got to go back and look at every regulation and get rid of every regulation. And on top of that, say, if we are competing with people that are opening up businesses in Panama and Colombia and Brazil and China and India and Vietnam, if we make it more difficult, we cannot succeed. And we don't think about it that way. I know we're all competing with each other for jobs. We're really competing with the rest of the world for jobs. And whether it's manufacturing or any other job, if we make it, if our taxes are higher, if our regulations more, if our litigation's more, we will not succeed.